Now, back to that Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.
All right, my next guest is no stranger if you've been around the performing arts community in New York City, where he's oftentimes portrayed on stage different characters of some of the key writings of the subject of his most recent film. But that film is coming to on demand through our friends at PureFlix, and we're very excited about that possibility. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd love you to put your hands together for Max McLean. Hello, Max.
Thank you, Kevin. Good to be with you.
It's great to be with you. I love the portrayal of C.S. Lewis in his untold story. Talk to me about how it came about.
Well, it was born actually out of the pandemic. We had talked about making, had a stage play called The Most Reluctant Convert it started in 2016 and toured. It ran for 15 weeks in New York.
Right.
And then it toured the country. And we talked about making a movie of it. But, we thought that was going to be 2 or 3 years down the road. And then in March of 2020, of course, all theaters were shut down, 15 days to flatten the curve. Remember that?
Yep.
Yeah. When I thought, what am I going to do for the next 2 weeks?
Turned into 2 years to get out of your apartment.
Exactly. And so, but in the meantime, we started working more on the script, and then our director was Norman Stone, and he said, Britain is opening up for filmmaking, and nobody's worked. Has been working since March, so they're going to open up in August, and if we can get our act together, I can get a really good crew and cast at a very good rates because nobody's worked. And I said, well, if you can confirm that and get the locations we need, I'll go to my board and see if we can get the funding to get the film in the can, and we'll worry about post-production and distribution later. And so, I went to England on a plane as big as Air Force One with fewer people on it. Quarantined for 2 weeks, began shooting in mid-September, finished by mid-October. And as soon as we were done, they shut down for filmmaking because there was another variant that came and everything shut down. So that was a real providential blessing there. And then that was in October 20, and then we the event cinema release we did was in November of 21, and it was only supposed to be a 1-day event, and it became it stayed in theaters for 4 weeks.
Yeah,
and now it's done very well. It was a number two movie in America the night it opened, and did very, very well in the cinemas. And then we've done really well in Amazon, and now I'm really glad PureFlix is picking it up.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable, and I don't think that I've had a chance to ever ask you about this directly, but C.S. Lewis, obviously a huge influence on your work, and I'm curious what you most appreciate about the life of this very well-known writer, and the impact he left on the world.
Yeah. He read everything from the Greeks to the moderns. He had a steel-trap mind that could remember everything he read. And then he had this unusual ability to translate it into magnificent prose and speech. At the highest levels. I think he's one of the great writers of all time, certainly in the English language. And then, of course, for the Christian, he did it all under the headship of Jesus. And so for us, literary types, sometimes academic types, we want a connection between the heart and the head. And Lewis seems to be our go-to guy for that.
Yeah.
And
he wrestled.
Really
it was a wrestling match for him, because obviously, as your film portrays, he didn't walk, the unquestioned upright story the whole time. I mean, there was some real doubt and real heartache that he wrestled with. Right.
And of course, what I'm referencing is after the fact. Yeah, the film actually portrays that, his life, he came to the conclusion, based on the fact he lost his mother to cancer at 9 years old. He had a a very strained relationship with his father that he regretted all his life, that he never repaired that. He experienced the butchery of trench warfare in World War One, and he came to the conclusion, as a result of all that, that either there's no God behind the universe, a God who's indifferent to good and evil, or worse, an evil God. Someone asked him when he went back to Oxford after the war, he said, were you much frightened in France in the trenches? He said, all the time, but I never sank so low as to pray. I mean, that's, he was pretty far down, in terms of where he was. And on the basis of his relationships with people like J.R. Tolkien and Owen Barfield, he said his argument against God was that the universe was so cruel and unjust. But where had he got this notion of cruel and unjust? He says he calls a line crooked because he has some idea of a straight line. Well, what was he comparing this universe with when he called it cruel and unjust? And that was the beginning point, because he was so
right.
He was so logical and so clear in his thinking that he had to come to terms with that.
Real quickly, I've heard different stories about he and Tolkien's relationship, and I'm just curious, from where you sit, what do you think was the most significant aspect of those two literary giants in their relationship?
Well, there's a lot. One is Lewis, his conversion to Christianity was based on his relationship with Tolkien, and it was an unusual conversion because he'd already become a theist in the sense that he believed in one supreme God, but he had no place for Jesus. He says, the God whom he knew nothing of the incarnation, the God to whom he surrendered was not human. He just couldn't understand how the life and death of someone else 2,000 years ago could be of any significance here and now.
Yeah.
And he said it wasn't until his friend Professor Tolkien showed him that they were both medievalists, and he said that showed him that all this vague in the pagan religions, there's this vague notion of a god who's killed, broken, come to life again. Balder, Osiris, Dionysus, Adonis, all the myths. He says, but then among these Jews, this thing really happened. The myth became fact, and the fact that he said that when he read the mythological stories, he was really moved by them. But when he read the gospel, he wasn't, because he looked at the gospel different. He looked at it as precepts or something, that some sort of political association perhaps, but he didn't get into the real power of the story of who Jesus is. And so that caused him to read the gospel differently.
Sure.
And he came to terms with Jesus as a result of that. So that was number one. And number two, they both would not have written their greatest works without the influence and encouragement of each other.
Okay, hold that thought. We're going to come back. My very special guest is Max McLean here on this edition of That Kevin Show. Stay here.
Ready or not, he'll be right back. That Kevin Show with Kevin McCullough.